The key with conversation and connection is that we're listening, that we are there present to listen to what that person is telling us. That is currency for our kids. When they know that when they come to you or when they're talking about their day, that you're listening. Because if you're going to listen to the mundane things, you're certainly going to listen to the important things.
All right, welcome back to the Calm the Chaos Parenting Podcast. Now, if you have ever got really frustrated because you found out that your kids were sexting, or your kids walked up to you in front of all of your family members and said, "Hey, Mom, what is this?" And it was a quite embarrassing topic. Well, I have got the guest for you today because when we have those difficult conversations, our mind can go blank. And that is why I am so excited to invite on Dr. Robyn Silverman, who is going to be talking about how to talk to kids about pretty much anything. Known as the Conversation Doc, Dr. Robyn Silverman is a child and teen development specialist and author of the brand new book, How to Talk to Kids About Anything, as well as the host of the popular podcast of the same name. Welcome, Robyn. I am so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here with you, you colorful, fabulous person.
Well, as we were saying before, you are so colorful. I had the pleasure of getting to meet you on your podcast, yes. And you are just so lively and so energetic. And I am so excited to introduce you to my audience and have them hear some of your great wisdom. You have really packed it into your book. So I'm so excited to unravel some of that. Every page I was like, wow. And then she added that. Oh, wow. And she added that. I mean, it is really brilliantly done. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. That means so much to me. Yeah, this was, it was a long time coming.
Yeah. The book birthing process is definitely a big one. So there's so many things you could have talked about in your expertise, but you chose to talk about conversation. So why are you so passionate about having these hard conversations with kids?
Usually it comes down to, hey, let's just talk about me. Like when it comes to what is it we're really passionate about, it's because of something that probably happened to us at some point in our lives. And that is exactly what happened. So when I was in 5th grade, I was bullied. It was the worst year of my life. Like it's really on par with when I had my miscarriages. Like I just to tell you like how bad it was a full year and it was every day. When you're a kid, you can't get away from it. You're going to school. That's what's going to happen. There's no way to hide it. You're going to school. So there was a girl and it was 2 girls, one who was quote unquote my best friend and the other one who wanted to be her best friend. And that did not work out in my favor, this triangle. If anybody remembers who's listening, how your 5th grade or that kind of year went when it came to friendships, it's a little wonky. It was one of the worst years of my life. So because of what was happening to me, I was going home every day crying, like, with the tissues. I just remember my poor mom like handing me tissues and tissues and tissues over and over again and not knowing what to say or do. And she tried and she cared, but there was, what are you going to say? And as a parent now, it's like, you just want to be like, just don't be friends with her. You don't know what to say, but that's like really what you just want to just go, just cut it off. And at the same time in school, they didn't know what to say. I still remember my teacher trying to fix it by sending me to the library alone to sit, and she talked to the entire class without me there. I mean, that's super horrible and embarrassing as it is. And then she sent the girl who was quote unquote my best friend to come and get me. That's awful. Oh. And then she was like, side-eyeing me and saying horrible things on the way back to the classroom. And then walking into that classroom by myself, sitting down and everybody staring at me and the teacher being like, what do you want to say? I mean, it is just freaking horrible. So coming from that, I knew that I wanted to help the adults in the lives of kids know what to say, how to say it, the tips around it. and really the important topics, because while that was bullying, it happened really again and again throughout my life. And I had amazing parents. Like, I really lucked out in the parent department, but that generation really didn't talk to us about a lot of these very, very tough topics. And the time that they did, they're memorable. Like, I'm really happy I had conversations with my dad about making sure you raise your hand and speak out. But and that's memorable to me. But there were so many conversations that we didn't have, maybe because of them, maybe because of me, maybe, because it just wasn't a thing back then. So I made it a thing.
And, it's one of the most common questions that I probably get is, what do I say? What do I do? And a lot of times the people who are coming to me are asking, what do I say? What do I do in the heat of the moment?
Right.
And I know that you and I both have some very similar beliefs on this. So I wasn't planning on asking you about this, but before we get into it, why don't we talk about when is the right time to say and do things and when is not the best time?
Well, I'll say that you and I definitely are going to say the same thing in this department. First of all, the best time to talk about it is now, essentially, yesterday, now, tomorrow, anytime is the best time. You want to start when the child is young. If it's possible, those of you who are listening right now and they're like, missed the boat. No, today's a great day too. But if it's possible, you can talk to your kid when they're young. And sometimes people will be like, when did you start talking to your kid about adoption? Because we adopted both of my kids. I'm like, when they were infants, like on the first day of their life, not because of them, but because of me. You want to get the words out. You want to know what you're saying. You want to feel comfortable so that by the time they are understanding it, you're like, hey, I got this. I've told you this hundreds of times. So if you can start the conversation, people talk about the sex talk with the capital T, and it's not one big talk. It's like a series of little ones that happen over time. Same with failure, same with death. They're all this series of conversations, or what I call pre-talks, where you're starting with something like, you're talking about death and you start with the bug on the sidewalk or the plant that died and how you didn't you didn't water it and you didn't feed it, and now this is what happens because when you're not eating and you're not drinking and you die, right? So you're having these conversations with kids, or when it comes to sex, you're talking about consent and you're talking about body parts and all these little things that lead up to the point where you start talking about the egg and the sperm. And then not even then are you talking about mechanics because they haven't asked about it. Then when they do, you're not having a 3-hour, dissertation on sex. You fill in this little piece. And then
so I need to put the PowerPoint away.
Yeah, no,
so we're not doing a PowerPoint.
No, so that's what I'm saying. It's like any time is a good time. No, what's not a good time? In the heat of the moment when your child is steaming mad, it's not the best time to talk about what's happening in your body when you're angry. But after, you can totally talk about that. Before, what happened to you when you lost your mind and you apologize to your kid, that's a great time to talk about all that.
Yeah, I love that. And I was hoping you were going to talk about it in the heat of the moment. And I love that you also shared, you can talk about this anytime at any age and not wait until it becomes a big kind of elephant in the room that you're afraid to talk about. Because if it's just part of how you talk and how you communicate, then it's going to be a lot easier to bring up these more difficult conversations. I am curious. I love getting the tea on things. So what is the hardest conversation you feel like you had as a parent?
Okay. So I'll say that I thought the sex conversation was going to be my hardest, and I just happened to have had some interviews before that on how to talk to kids about sex, and those are absolutely reflected in my book in that chapter. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am the luckiest person alive that I got this full on master class on how to talk about this before this happened, because I felt so very equipped. So please know, if you're freaking out about that conversation, look at that chapter and you are going to feel so much better. Okay. But it turns out that turned out to be one of my favorite conversations, because when my daughter had asked that, and it turned out the mechanics part was this small part. We were talking about consent and why you're with somebody and how she asked me, did it hurt? And, does it hurt when you do that? I'm like, well, if you like don't want to be doing it and you're like being forced to do it, absolutely. It can hurt your body and can hurt your feelings. But when you're really like excited to be there and you love the person and they really care about you, like it can be wonderful. Like this was such a good conversation. But as far as like, like when my son starts asking questions, like now you're like, okay, with my daughter, I felt different. You're going to feel different with like different kids. But he asked, I'm sitting in his room and he's like asking about erections.
That was a hard one for me too, but
right?
He didn't ask. He came running into my room at like 7 in the middle of the night, and he's like, "We need to go to the hospital. It's broken."
Oh,
like he was adamant.
I just want to zero in on the pun joke that you didn't mean to make. Like erections. Oh, that was a hard one. Like, thank you for that. That just got a little inner glee from that. Okay, so yeah. He was asking because it had been brought up somewhere along the I don't know what the conversation was, but somewhere along the line, it kind of was being brought up. And he was asking, well, if it happens like at school, like what do you do about it? Now, that's like mainly the reason why I felt like, ooh, this is going to be a tough conversation because I did not have this happen to me. Okay. I did not have this happen. So I called in reinforcements. I'm like, honey, can you come in here? Poor thing. My husband has walked into some pretty tough conversations. I've sat down to my table at like dinner and like, research says that the majority of kids have seen porn by your age group. Have you? Like my husband's sitting there. He's like, damn it. Here we are again. So when I'm in this room with my son and he's asking this, I'm like, so Noah is curious about like, what do boys do if this happens in the middle of class? Like, what should you do? Or what should you do like to prepare? And he's like, my husband's like, don't wear gray sweatpants. And like, all right, that's like, don't wear, he's recalling from the past. Don't wear gray sweatpants and make sure you have books with you. And when your teacher calls you up to the board, just be like, no, thank you. He's giving like practical steps, which like honestly think they're good steps because I don't know. So for me, it's like conversations where I have had no prior experience at all. And like I can sympathize with the circumstance of being like embarrassed, but I you can't really empathize in the same way because it hasn't happened to you. Yeah.
Oh, I totally understand that. Thank you for sharing that. It's both delightful to hear and also, it's really good to hear that you, who specializes in conversations, has struggled to have conversations as well. I think it's just really good for people to hear that we're all human and we're all figuring this out, despite how much research and science we have behind us.
But the key is that the key is that you still have the conversation. Like, even if you need to like go back and be like, I need 5 minutes, and you go get my book and you like read it or like read a piece of it, or you call in reinforcements, or you say like, I have never experienced, let's say, anxiety or whatever, like, but Aunt Jen, has, let's get you connected with it. You still want them to get the information. So let me just put that in as a caveat.
I love that. And so that kind of brings us into, you have figured out some ways that make this easier and some traps that people can fall into, that parents fall into, that you can avoid to make this easier. And so I find that a lot of parents have a lot of fear, and you talked a little bit about this already, but a lot of fear going into conversation, or they have a lot going on in their own head. Maybe they're already upset. They're already almost resentful that they're having to have this conversation, or maybe they're triggered by the conversation because of their past. What are some ways that parents can ground themselves so that they can have these conversations that are really hard?
I love that you're asking this because, of course, calm the chaos. We really do need to calm the chaos inside of our heads before we launch into these conversations, because they won't land well otherwise. So first of all, if you know that you're having a struggle with a particular conversation because of something happened in your past, or you're dealing with something now, your child is starting to date and you just got a divorce, or whatever like is happening at that point that's making that happen, like that's a time to reach out to a peer, to a therapist, to somebody who you can talk to. Maybe you have a partner, a spouse, like that's a time to have those conversations with somebody who can give you feedback and really listen to you so that you can unload that heavy load and then come into the conversation with more of an empty basket. Because when you go
Mm,
in with your own agenda, you go in hyped up, as we know, even when we're dealing with our children, like when they're full up, they can't talk to us, right? There's no hearing us. And the conversation happens between two or more people. It's not you unloading onto somebody else. That's, a soliloquy. That's when you're just, going on and pontificating yourself. You're not actually engaging in a conversation where you're curious. You're going in with curiosity because you're going in with your agenda. And rightfully so, because you're upset or frustrated, and you deserve to talk to somebody about that. You deserve to be heard, but not in the context between yourself and your child, because your child can't actually be that person for you.
that's so helpful. Just not bringing that in, but it's completely okay for us to have those feelings and
Of
to
course.
then, we're valid in that. And we need to just
Hmm.
have someone that we can, or a group, or support in order for us to handle our own struggles, our own needs. And then we can go into the conversation. I love that
Yeah.
100%.
Or you
Yeah.
can you can be writing about it, or I
Hmm.
I I was at a point, after right after the pandemic, that I was like feeling really low. And so I went and dug into my passions. Like, what's my passion? What fills me, fuels me? And I joined my singing lessons because for me, singing is something that brings me joy and it helps me. My singing teacher actually said to me on that first time, she was like, "So, what brings you here right now?" And I was like, "I need to rediscover my joy."
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't have that outlet, you take it out in conversation or in your behavior, in the way that you're acting. So use something that grounds you in that way, where you're finding your joy, where you're talking it out with somebody else, or you know basic stuff like when you're like, I don't process with other people. That's totally fine.
Hmm.
Like maybe you process by breathing, maybe you process by meditating. My daughter loves to take showers when she's in that state. For her, that sensory input is really important, that hot bath or that hot shower. So, what really calms you in that moment? I mean, yelling in the shower is like something I absolutely did when my kids were younger, because instead of, unleashing on them, being so frustrated about why they were fighting yet again, I would just
Hmm.
remove myself, get in the shower, because there's nobody in there. And
Yeah.
nobody is going to be, going in and fighting in front of me while I'm in the shower.
Thank you so much for those tips. I'm curious, you talk a lot in your book about connection, because having conversations is hard to do when you don't have trust, when you don't have a base level of connection. And so a lot of parents, especially, in our world, because we have parents who are dealing with a lot of challenging behavior, maybe they've been dealing with this for a long time. So there might be disconnection between their partner with their kids. What are some of the tips that you have, or some of the ideas for creating a base level of trust and connection before starting these conversations?
It's really important to have that connection when
Mhm.
you want to have important conversations. And that connection happens sometimes not when we're not talking at all. It can happen
Mm,
when you're sitting next to somebody and you're just in the same space. It can also happen when you're talking about just daily things. But the key with conversation and connection is that we're listening, that we
mm,
are there present to listen to what that person is telling us. That is currency for our kids when they
mm,
know that when they come to you or when they're talking about their day, that you're listening. Because if you're going to listen to the mundane things, you're certainly going to listen to the important things. So that's the time when you show, I want to get to know your world. Your child is playing Roblox, you could care less. But you ask them, tell me more about that. Like, what is it that
Mm.
you love about that? Who were you playing with? What did they do? What did you do? What made you laugh? These are connectors, even though they seem trivial. They're not trivial.
Mhm.
And by sitting there and listening to what your child says, listening to their words, listening to their mood and their energy, listening to what it does in your own body for your intuition, where you can say, wow, it sounds like when you're playing that game and you're playing with your friend Ben, you really get excited and you feel like this is something that makes you better friends. They might not
Mm.
have said that, but you're hearing all these different levels when you're listening. And that makes you a key adult in that child's life who they know they're going to come to you when the stuff really hits the fan, and you're going to take the time to listen.
So go back to that situation in fifth grade and kind of place yourself in your mom's shoes, knowing what you just said and sharing some of these listening techniques. What are some things that a parent could do if they're just trying to connect, but not necessarily talk about the topic yet?
What a beautiful question to put yourself into your shoes from when you were younger. I think that if an adult, and my mom had sat with me and said, I hear you. You
Mm.
you deserve to have a friend who includes you. You deserve to have somebody who loves you both in school and outside of school, that acts the same both in school and out of school. Just reflecting what I was saying. It must be really confusing for you to have somebody
Mm.
who wants to do overnights with you on the weekends, but then ignores you in school or doesn't defend you when other people are saying mean things about you. That must have felt really lonely for you to walk into that room with all those people looking at you. I think that would have validated the
Mhm.
situation because there was no solution at that point. And I think at the time, I kept thinking that I needed to do something different. And I think I needed somebody to be like, you're doing nothing wrong. I'm hearing what you're telling me, and you're not doing anything wrong. What I'm hearing is that other people are making choices that aren't very kind, and you're reacting like any human being and
Mhm.
saying that this doesn't feel good. I think that would have
Mm.
been a really good start. And then we could have gone into more of what is a real friend to you?
Mm.
How would you describe a friend? What are the words that come to mind for you? Okay, you're saying that this person is your friend, but are they embodying those words that you're telling me right now? Are they kind? Are they are they loyal? Are they being caring? If the answer is no, and your definition is these three words, then who is those three words? Maybe we should make
Mm.
a time to talk with them and get together with them. It would have moved the needle, I think, more.
Mm.
Instead of the way that parents typically are, which is let me fix this, let me tell you what to do. You have to bring your child along in conversation.
Mm.
And by bringing them along, I mean, you can't be the only one talking, and we usually
Mm.
are, right? We think of like father knows best, like that old kind of way that our parents would like unleash this fabulous wisdom at the end of the sitcom. But that's not how it works. Conversations
Mhm.
happen between two or more people, and when you bring them along, the connection happens and more conversation happens after that.
Listening to you, you sound like you make it sound so easy. And I
Mm.
know that people have said to you, can you just come and have the talk with my kid for me?
That is for sure.
And I know you can't do that, But what I am curious, I have found that when people can understand the why, the how becomes easier. So can you share a
Mm,
little bit behind the science behind the
mm,
conversations and
yeah.
some of those scripts that you're doing? What is some of that people can take away and say, okay, when I need to have a hard conversation, maybe this is some of the stuff I need to remember about the science?
Oh, I love that. And I do provide a lot of science because, and in a very accessible way, but for me, it's important
Mhm.
too. So it turns out, like, let's say the sex talk, okay? Like that, so many parents, if you're like, what's the freaking biggest conversation? You're like, I do not want to have this with my child. Like a lot of them will choose the sex talk. It turns out that the science says that kids want to talk about this with us.
Mhm.
They want to. And those parents who do have the conversations with us about, let's say, sex, are much less likely to engage in risky behavior. They are more likely to delay sexual activity, and they're much more likely to make smarter choices when it comes to sex. Similarly, suicide. So many people have said, I don't want to bring this up. I feel like I'd be putting this idea in their heads. That actually is the opposite of what happens. When we talk
Mhm.
about something like suicide, our kids are less likely to have suicidal ideation. They're less likely to do it. There's a huge study in 2005 that actually shows this, that the more we talk about this terrible topic, the more likely your child will feel like I'm connected with somebody. Somebody is trying to, help me here. They're bridging the gap. They're helping me by giving me somebody to talk to. I'm opening up about this. I'm not so alone. They're much less likely to engage in risky behavior, and much less likely for suicide to be their end result. So this happens again and again. People who talk to their kids about money, those kids are going to be much more well versed in how to handle money. They're not going to be the person who doesn't have money to spend on their rent because they just, went to 5 concerts. We have to talk about it because it is the answer to helping curb the risky behavior, increase the knowledge, increase informed decision making. So I would keep those things in mind, though, that kids want to talk to us about this. And when we do, good things happen.
All right, so let's kind of bring this home with some things that people can walk away with. They want to leave this. They've been listening the whole time and they're like, "Okay, I'm ready to have that talk." What are some frameworks or things that parents can kind of be thinking of as they create these scripts or conversations to go and talk with their kids?
So, I mean, in the book, I provide a lot of conversation starters and say this and not that. So it depends on what topic you're talking about. But when we are, let's say you're talking about death or sex, understand that there are age appropriate things that we're doing. You're starting with talking about the body parts and remembering that we're not just, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Like there are other body parts and they do need to know the names of them. And we're going to use the real names in the same way that when we're talking about death, we're going to use the real terminology. We're going to say death, we're going to say dying, we're going to say dead, because when we say euphemisms like they went to sleep, they went to the farm, you create such confusion. They got sick and died. It's confusing. Then what happens when you get sick? So we're going to be careful with that. Oh, this is a different kind. This is a disease. It's called cancer. This is what happened to the body. So you're being very specific with your words, and then you're making sure you're not using the euphemisms, whether it's for the body parts, because we don't want to be calling something a cookie, and then the child says, he touched my cookie, and you say, oh honey, we could split the cookie in half next time. You're not talking about the same thing. Okay, we want to make sure that we are giving our children the correct language, whether we're talking about death or sex or failure or anything else. And when you're talking about things like failure or perfectionism, things that happen on the everyday, like take those opportunities. So my son was sitting in the backseat of my car when he was maybe like 3 or 4 years old. We're on our way to the park and he's coloring in his coloring book. And he says, Ma, doing a good job, but it's not perfect. It's not perfect. And you can just go, oh, I'm sure it's great, honey. Love you. But take those opportunities. Like it's like a lob up from the universe. Oh, well, do you know that humans are not perfect? Do you know that machines that are made can be perfect? They can draw completely in the lines, but human beings, we are not perfect. Here's how mommy is not perfect, and here's how you're not perfect, and that's okay. And you're able to start to talk about this. Sometimes we feel like we need to be, that we want to be. We get frustrated when we're not. How do you feel when it's not perfect? Do you feel like it's not that good enough? Actually, I think that it is, because human beings have all these wonderful things about them. And you can go and insert your values. You can start talking about the people that help to showcase this. Let's say it's a young kid like this was. Did you know that Dr. Seuss, who we read all the time, he had to submit his books 27 times before somebody said, this is a good book. You think he thought, oh, my books are not very good. They're not perfect. And your child will be able to contribute to those conversations. Allow them to. I love those stories of people that demonstrate it. When we can talk about Olympians, countless stories, authors, artists. I do a lot of those in my book so that you're able to say, here's what happened with this person. What do you think about that? If you were Dr. Seuss's best friend when he was submitting all these things, what would you say to him? And it allows that child to start to contribute to the conversation, and for you to answer questions that are relatable, instead of you lecturing to your child and them just going, nodding their head and saying, okay.
Those are really helpful tips. And I know that it's going to help people be able to create better conversations with their kids, especially on these really tough conversations. And, your book is just, like we said before, just chock full of tips and say this, not this. And here's some sentence starters. And I always find sentence starters to be so incredibly helpful and powerful. Before we wrap up, I have one final question. I like to ask it kind of everyone. And it's, if you were sitting in front of a parent right now and they are at their wits' end and they are feeling like they've at the tip of their tongue, they've got this conversation, they've noticed something with their kid, they don't know how to bring it up. And you only had like a minute or two to talk to them about something, and you've got so much in your book. I know, go read the whole book, right? But what if there was just one thing that you could tell them? What would that one thing be that they need to hear?
I often say that when we have a very awkward conversation to have, to just say it up front that it is super awkward, to just state it outright. Honey, I have something I want to talk to you about. I got to get it out, but I'm feeling super awkward. And I really wish I didn't have to talk to you about this, but I love you so much that I want it to come from me. I am your safe person. I don't want it to come from the boy in the back of the bus. I don't want it to come from the internet. I don't want it to come from some stranger. I want it to come from me. So help me take a deep breath here. We both have talked about really weird things in our past. You know you're rooting me on. So here it goes. And then say it. And usually it's not quite as bad as we think it's going to be. The buildup is usually much worse. I tell you, that sex conversation I thought was going to be super, super difficult. And it turns out to be one of my favorite memories. So you never know. And you're doing your kid a really big favor by stepping up and stepping in to the awkward.
I love that so much. Well, Dr. Robyn, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and for this amazing book that you've written. Can you tell people where to find out more about you and where to get your book?
Thank you. They can go to drrobynsilverman.com. It's Robyn with a Y. So Dr. ROBYN, Silverman.com. They can also find me, all over social media at Dr. Robyn Silverman, or on X at Dr. Robyn. X, this is My book is How to Talk to Kids About Anything, and you can find it anywhere books are sold, from Amazon to Barnes and Noble to Target to your fabulous local indie bookstore, which we always want to support. So I hope you'll buy my book. I hope you'll love it. I hope you'll read it through, but I hope you'll refer to it, time and time again. I want it to be the evergreen book, the best friend you wish you had. And I can be there at 3 a.m. There you are.
And for everyone listening, we are going to include all of those amazing links in the show notes below. So all you have to do is go to, if you're listening, you can go to calmthechaospodcast.com, and we'll have all those links linking you right to Dr. Robyn's amazing work and her podcast and her book and all the things. I highly recommend it. I think this is a book that should be on every parent's bookshelf. So go and check that out. And I am so excited to have more and more conversations with experts just like Dr. Robyn, and to really dive into helping you have difficult conversations and to empower you so that you can feel more connected. You can help your kids feel more seen and heard and understood. And I will be doing that on every episode, and I will see you here next week at calmthechaospodcast.com. And if you haven't checked it out yet, be sure to go check out Calm the Chaos book. It is out in stores everywhere. And so you can check that out. And we talk about how to have those difficult conversations in a very different way. I talk about how to set it up. I talk about how to get connected. But Dr. Robyn talks about all of the scripts, all of the really, really nitty gritty in how to have every difficult conversation you could think of under the sun. So they are a great match made for parents who are going through challenging times. So go check out both of them, Dr. Robyn at How to Talk to Kids About Anything and Calm the Chaos. And I will talk to you guys on the next episode. And I just want to remind each and every one of you that if you're listening to this and you felt a little judged, a little worried, oh, have I messed up? I want you to know, absolutely not. You are exactly the parent that your kid needs. You are doing the best job with what you've been given so far. So I want you to know you are not a failure. Your kid is not broken, and you are no longer alone. So just remember, you've got this. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.